My name is Helen and I'm 32 years old. Although it is the beginning of a new year, nothing good has happened at all. Most of our electrical appliances in our house have broken down, and my eldest daughter, Maggie, had to change classes as soon as she entered the 3rd grade. And since she was not in class with all her best friends, she goes to school every day in a very grumpy mood. She often asked for a day off because she was unhappy at school. I try to calm her down and make her go to school every day, but to be honest, it's very difficult to do that every single morning. Began playing volleyball during spring at his volleyball club, but he recently sprained his finger. It seems like he had a fracture, and I had to arrive at work late every week to accompany him to the hospital. People at work make me feel ashamed of myself every day, since they would talk behind my back just because I had kids. Stan quit his work 3 months ago because he got mentally depressed due to the horrible power harassment he received by his previous boss. Although he transferred to a new company where it's easier for him to work than before, his income had dropped drastically. Despite these problems which happened to our family, Dan and I are doing the best we can at the moment. Recently, however, something horrible happened to our family. My mother passed away. She had been very healthy until recently, but she had been feeling exhausted for days on end and went to the nearest hospital for a checkup. They accompanied her to the hospital, and at the hospital, the doctor told us the name of the disease that she had, and I really couldn't believe my ears. She had terminal cancer. My mother was surprised as well. When the doctor told me that the disease had progressed to the point where there was nothing they could do, my mind went blank. My mother, who was surprisingly calm, laughed and encouraged me. "Oh, don't worry, maybe I can get better." My mother's positivity at times like this was one of the best things about her, but at that time, it even looked like she was pretending to be fine. Her condition worsened day by day, unfortunately, and only 1 month after we were informed by the doctor about her disease, she passed away. The pain and loneliness of knowing that someone's life had been snuffed out so easily, and that I could no longer talk to my mother, whom I loved so much, overwhelmed me, and I felt as if there was a huge hole in my heart. Because I had my kids, and because I was just so busy with preparations leading up to the funeral, I couldn't even actually feel the sadness of my mother's death. After everything was over, an unspeakable sadness overtook me, and I sobbed in front of my mother's photo, as I had realized that I was actually saying goodbye to my beloved mother. Then, right after, something had happened. One day, a month after my mother's funeral, I found a letter from a credit card company in our mailbox, and it was sent to my name. It did indeed have a credit card, but I had never used it since I got married, and it had been hidden in the back of the drawer where I kept my bank book and personal things. This one thinking for a moment that it had expired and a new credit card had arrived. I opened the letter. Then when I opened the letter, I found a detailed statement of the credit card, which states that I had used the credit card when I had absolutely no recollection of ever using it. The total amount exceeded $10,000. Even though I looked at the details of the statement over and over, I really had no idea what they all were. I thought my credit card information had been hacked, so in panic, I called my credit card company. I explained the situation and asked them to stop the card. Then, when Dan came home from work, I apologized to him and explained the situation. And my credit card information might have been stolen. About $10,000 were used with my credit card.
Are you joking, right?
Dan couldn't believe what he was hearing. I apologized to him repeatedly. Weeks immediately after that, I searched for the credit card I had put away in the back of the drawer, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I even came up with a theory that maybe a thief had stolen it, since I never took out the credit card after I put it in the drawer the last time.
This all happened because you had a credit card that you never even used.
I couldn't say anything back to Dan, who was half angry and half fed up of the situation, as he had a point and all I could do was to keep apologizing. $10,000 is a very large sum of money for our family. Since it was impossible to pay it all in one lump sum, we finally decided that we would pay it back in installments and for the rest of the day. I was just depressed. It was that day after the kids had gone to bed, when I was reviewing the family account book beside Dan, who was looking over at the credit card statement.
Ben.
Dan looked like he realized something. When I asked, Han pointed to one particular item on the statement that made me dizzy just by looking at it.
Is the name of a hotel where my mom said that she was going on a trip with her friends this month, and that's where they were all staying at.
It was the name of a hotel where my mom said that she was going on a trip with her friends this month, and that's where they were all staying at. And $4,000 is being charged from there. I didn't even know my mother-in-law. Eilert was traveling until Dan told me just then. But when I stopped the credit card, I remembered that the lady on the other end of the phone had told me that it was being used at a certain outlet mall as well. That outlet mall was also located where Violet had traveled to. And on top of that, Eilert had visited us just last month. So, I got more suspicious and came up with a theory. Could it be that Violet has my credit card? Dan thought the same thing and immediately called Violet. At first, Dan was afraid to ask over the phone, but he gradually became irritated and annoyed once he began talking to Violet. What the hell were you thinking? This is a crime, you know. As we expected, Eilert took my credit card from the drawer while we weren't looking. She used the card to pay for her friend's hotel fee and spending sprees at the outlet mall. And it seemed like she didn't think what she did was anything wrong, and thought that anything he would say over the phone would not get us anywhere. So he decided to visit Violet later on to ask her for more details. Of course, I decided to accompany him. This meant that I couldn't use my paid leaves anymore after that, but I couldn't really care less about it. While the kids were at school, Dan and I drove over to Violet's house. Eilert has been living alone since her husband passed away a few years ago. These with family goodies, Whenever I see her, she would pick on me, and when I go home for Thanksgivings and New Year's, she would push me around to help her with house chores. You've married into our family, so you have to follow the rules of this house. The wife is the last one to eat her meal. While the husband is relaxing, the wife would work in the kitchen. Violet is always monitoring me on what I'm doing, and she points out every little detail to me. Can't you be more efficient? This is why I hate mothers like you who work at a company. If you got married, then you should do more for your family. I pity my son and the kids. Violet knows what's going on in our family, but she will never stop criticizing me. Just when she came to visit me last month, she came unannounced to see if I was doing my house chores properly and if I'm looking after the kids. She stayed for about a week, and even when I went to work, she just relaxed in the living room. I still remember that she never helped me with any of the house chores and would go back home after relaxing and doing nothing at our house. And I will never forget what Violet said to me when my mother passed away.
But your mother will be relieved now. We say parents are always in trouble when they have a child who isn't efficient at anything. And thank you, what me, D?
I was angry at Violet for belittling me and treating my mother's death like that. And so we arrived at Violet's house. Without a single apologetic look on her face, Violet quietly held out my credit card.
Oh, sir, it's not like you were using it, so it's fine.
That's not the point. I was just thinking that the bill's coming to us.
But Dan's voice rose at once after hearing what Violet had said. Of course, if someone spends a large sum of money on you, even if that person is your own mother, you'd tell her off. I was moved by Dan's honest attitude.
But Violet doesn't budge at all and says this. Because Helen's mother passed away, you'll receive her inheritance, right? Oh, why don't you just use it to cover the expenses? I'm sure you also get the life insurance money, so, this amount is nothing compared to it.
Sophia Lowe is trying to make us feel sorry for her, saying that she's living on a pension. I revealed my frustration at Violet, who once again took my mother's death lightly. Even though I was trembling with anger, she didn't care at all.
Oh yes, this house has been badly damaged by termites recently. The building itself is so old, so I'm thinking of demolishing it. I'm all set, so I'm going to your place next month.
Violet was not intimidated at all by Dan's low, angry reply. Rather, she became more arrogant than ever.
Oh then, so that means that I'll be living in your house and we'll be living together. Do you have extra room anyway, don't you?
I was speechless at Violet's attitude of trying to force us to pay for the money she had used and even to live with her. Even Dan, who is usually so kind to Violet, is raising his voice at her outlandish comments and actions.
Savage times. If you want me to live with you, then give me the money to rebuild this house.
Dan sighed quietly at Violet, who treated him with arrogance until the very end.
Alan, let's just go home now.
I followed Dan, who stood up without saying a word, and left Violet's house immediately. At that moment, Violet yells out to us saying this.
Oh then, since I'm not gonna rebuild it, I'll demolish this place.
Well then, since I'm not going to rebuild it, I'll demolish this place. The Poxstorp. I'll be moving in from next month. please take care of me well. Violet's voice sounded so triumphant that it made me so angry. But Dan was even angrier than I was.
Sure, if talking with my mom's not gonna work, I have no choice but to take action.
Witnessing Dan's anger, I realized that this was the beginning of the end for Violet. Bring the next month before Violet forces herself to move in with us. Dan told me about his plan. The company Dan works for has company housing as a benefit, and if there's an opening there, he planned for us to move there temporarily.
Doesn't matter what we say, Mom will do anything to have it her way. So, if that's the case, then we have to be prepared too.
Fortunately, Dan's company housing is close to our kids' school, and we brought enough daily necessities and clothes to live there for a while. I thought the kids would be confused by our sudden move, but they surprisingly got into it and helped us prepare moving out. I didn't know we had another house. Maggie looked really excited. I liked where we were living, but this one is really nice too. And Tim seemed to be enjoying himself. They used to sleep in their own rooms, but the company house only has one big bedroom. I think the kids were very happy to sleep with us in the same bed. And the room was perfect because it had furniture and appliances. So we were to live in that company housing for a while. Then on the day when Violet promised that she would move in, when Dan came home from work, he showed me his phone with a big smile on his face. Literally, I found Violet's call history one after another. I also showed him the call history as proof that I had also ignored all of her calls. We both couldn't help but laugh. Just in time, Dan received an incoming call from Violet.
Okay, well, I guess it's time now for us to pick up the call.
Hearing the kids having fun in the bath, my husband put the phone on speaker so that I could hear it, and as he answered the call, Violet's frantic voice spread throughout the room.
Where you are right now?
Well, it's no doubt that we tell her where we are.
I already asked people to start demolishing the house, so I can't go back there. Please, I'm in your house now.
Well, we can't, because we don't live there now.
How do you mean? Oh, she has no right to be like that.
So Dan tried to tell Violet off and hang up the phone.
So Dan tried to tell Violet off and hang up the phone. Violet then immediately started to panic.
Today's weather is heavy rain and flood warning with flood warnings, remember? Are you going to just let me stay out here in the weather like that?
You have a pension, which you've been saving, right? Why don't you just use it to stay at a hotel?
How could you say such a terrible thing? That's not the kind of thing you should say to your mother. Yeah,
Oh, you use Helen's credit card without her permission. You say no normal person would ask her to pay what you use with her credit card with her deceased mother's inheritance.
When my husband made a good argument, Violet choked up to argue back.
But that's not what this is about. Just let me in the house.
I told you, I can't actually let you go in our house without any permission. I'll call the police and accuse you of trespassing.
Now wait a minute, don't you dare hang up on me?
Ignoring Violet screaming, and hung up the phone without any care. After that, there were tons of incoming calls from Violet, but Dan consistently ignored them. Eventually, 4 p.m., Violet left a message on the answering machine apologizing for what she had done. Just later, on another day, Dan requested Violet, who was staying at a hotel, to meet us at a nearby restaurant. Violet apologized for everything, including using my credit card without my permission, thoughtlessly saying that my late mother's inheritance should pay for it, and her previous verbal abuse toward by Chinguamin. She apologized with her head down, but I thought she might hit her head on the table, and for my part, I felt a little bit better. After Violet's apology in front of Dan and me, she repaid me in cash the $10,000 she had used this time, taken from our savings account. My husband and I were astonished when we saw her remaining savings balance. Soon after Violet's husband passed away, Everett told us that her pension was low and asked us to send money to support her. It was an hour's drive to Violet's house, and our kids were still small, so we couldn't visit her often. So Dan and I discussed and agreed that at least we could support her by giving her some money, and since then, we have been sending a certain amount of money to Violet's savings account every month. Patiki, even when Dan changed his jobs and his income dropped, the amount which we kept on giving to support her remained the same.
I will not support you financially at all from now on.
Violet was astonished at her own son's words. But from everything that had happened, Dan strongly resented Violet's self-pity. But from everything that had happened, Dan strongly resented Violet's selfishness, so we had decided to do so, even without seeing her savings account. But to this, Violet turned completely pale and desperately clung on to Dan about it.
That's not fair. I've been saving for a long time. I don't want to use it.
As for a surgeon with that amount of money, you could easily afford to rent an apartment and even move into a nursing care facility. Also, I beg you to stay our lives.
To live together, this money could be yours, you know? I can't think of any reason for you all to not live with me in the future.
That's enough. You say that, but have you ever spent a single penny of money on us so far? Mary's textbooks. Dean's textbooks, they were all bought by Helen's mother. Plus, you never even spent money on your own grandchildren. Dude, when I was also worried about quitting my job, all you cared about was if I was able to send money to you.
Dan then brushed off Violet's clinging hands and walked away. I heard Violet crying, but I didn't even turn around. After that, as Dan had declared, we stopped sending money to Violet. It's most likely that we won't provide any financial support for Violet in the future. So this means that we had cut off ties with Violet. According to what we heard from Dan's acquaintance, Violet had rented an apartment and started living alone after that. It seems that moving into a nursing care facility wasn't an option for Violet, and she was afraid that her neighbors would find out that she'd been cut off from her only son's family as well. The new place she moved into seems to be a very old apartment, and she is supposedly living there quietly. Violet didn't hesitate at all to use my credit card because she just didn't want to touch her own savings. The reason why Dan was so angry with Violet was because he really couldn't believe her attitude towards our kids. Aggie and Tim and us, and how she refused to support our family financially. Dan said that he found it extremely shameful that Violet was selfish enough to save money only for herself so that she would have a nice lifestyle for herself when she got old. I feel like Violet will probably hardly use her savings. I'm actually nervous that with all the money in her savings account, she might get scammed someday. Even if she does get scammed, we definitely wouldn't help her in any way. After making sure that Violet moved into an apartment, we will move out of the company housing and move back into her house confidently.